thank the organizers of this conference for making this possible. I'm going to read slides so you can listen, but also see the words. So my paper is really in the context of a project called Aging Communication Technologies, or ACT, Experiencing a Digital World in Later Life, which is a consortium of researchers who are interested in the nexus between aging and digitally mediated communications from the point of view of what we are terming later life adults. So rather than asking what older people have to learn about digital media or communications as if this is the be-all and end-all of all of our lives, researchers at partner institutions are asking these other questions, including what might it mean for media, communications, and cultural studies scholars? What can we learn about the digital world from the perspective of people who acknowledge that they're older and that aging is a process, and who've lived through successive generations of media? And this is important. Methodologically, I've done studies on cell phones, but one of the things I quickly realized through that work was that talking about one media practice or device in isolation was in fact unsatisfactory, particularly when dealing with older adults. How might we then take their experiences of media into account? So the research in our network is being undertaken to address this relative absence of aging from media and communication studies, but also to intervene in gerontology, which typically doesn't consider communications, and if it does, it's to think about it in health-related terms only. So we're shifting our disciplinary focus from a default preoccupation with youth and middle age in researching on communication, particularly what is seen to be as an incommensurability between old age and new media, to generate research that includes a broader range of identities and experiencing for aging in a digital world. We have 3 interrelated areas of research that explain, I hope, the acronym ACT. You'll see slides that are samples of some of the projects like these memoryscapes. The first is Agency in Aging, which is emphasizing what we call collaborative creativity and the digital arts in later life. So we set up projects with older adults that are learning projects for specific skills, but that have some kind of cultural and artistic public outcome. Critical mediations is really from the perspective of cultural studies, and this is a slide from the work of Wendy Martin from Brunel University, who gave digital cameras to older adults who then photographed objects around their homes, and she uses these visual methods as a way to understand what is important to people in their households. What she also learned from doing that was their technologies were incredibly important to them. Telecommunications and technologies, the T, is dealing with research and researchers who are interested in this telecommunicational landscape, including social media and social media practices, including Skype. And at the bottom in the corner, you'll see an image from a flash mob that we co-organized with a group called RECA, Respecting Elders Communities Against Abuse. And if you want, we can talk a lot later about the influence in multiple levels of social media, both on the reason they decided to do a flash mob, the way that they ended up filming it and we worked with them, and then the distribution of their flash mob activity later for World Elder Abuse Awareness Day on YouTube. So we always engage in a collaborative focus. We work with organizations, including public libraries, group RECA, who is a group of well, they're not newcomers in Montreal, but they're from what is termed quite often ethnocultural communities who deal with elder abuse in those communities using traditional, well not traditional, but theater without words in order to be able to communicate across languages. As well, we work with HLMs, which are social housing organizations in Quebec, in Montreal, and with mediators within that, including Group Harmony, to talk about how it is we might connect people who are seriously disadvantaged. We think of communication not only as a process of information transmission, but we connect it to shared rituals, practices, protocols of interaction, and the co-production of different symbolic forms that we make together. So why are we doing this now? Why act now? It's because of two basic megatrends. One, what is called the aging of the world population, but as well this kind of movement towards the kind of digitization of everything, or what people in the German tradition of media studies would call the mediatization of all forms of communication. So at the same time that we're expecting people to live longer worldwide, we're seeing proliferation of these kinds of devices. But as well, and it's been mentioned here, there's a new trend and tendency that's been identified in Canada, which is what they're calling the appification of everything, which means the translation of software into something you click on a touch screen that has a limited functionality, which often presents, again, it's a transformation in the way that media is being delivered. We know that digital divides exist in our country, and here's a map of Canada, and the green that you see is where there is cell phone coverage. So before we even talk about social media, I think we have to understand these infrastructural issues and the ways that populations are dispersed, but also communications infrastructure is structured and dispersed. So you can see that the northern territories and rural areas are poorly served. Here's some stats from 2007, and again, these are what are significant factors. I don't have gender up here because in terms of broadband usage, they're equivalent in Canada. But one of the key differences here is you can see that 93% of Canadians 34 years of under have used the internet, and that for those who are 65 and over, the stats are 29%. But what also matters here is household income, education, and if you live in a rural or an urban area. This gap is actually not decreasing with the proliferation of these devices. Access to the internet, from what we can tell from 2012 statistics, is actually increasing slightly. So, within this scenario, what we're considering is the role played by communications in augmenting both, not just inequalities and the ability for citizens to participate, but unequal relations of power in so-called developed nations. And here an important statistic for me is that in my country, 42% of our Aboriginal population only have access to broadband internet. So we have a host of policy documents addressing aging populations. And we have standing commissions on aging and on digital communications, such as this one. However, what we don't have is a conversation between policymakers in these two realms. And that's where we come in and try and fill the gap. As well, within most academic studies of ICTs or communication or technologies, older adults are rarely taken as ideal subjects. And I think it's interesting to ask ourselves who we sample. Representations as well of older adults with technologies are often a source of bemusement. And if you want to see one, it's funny, you can take it ironically, but it's the iPad chopping board video put out on YouTube, which is all about the incommensurability of a daughter and a grandfather using an iPad. So these are these depictions typify the ways that old age and new media are perceived as incommensurable, that is, as not having anything to do with each other, as producing generational conflict, or as being an irreverent appropriation by an uncomprehending elder. So this isn't a problem except when the practices of the young are assumed to have a predictive value, and that our current present and the current present of those who are in their younger years are presumed also to have predictive value for later years. We don't know this. There are not enough longitudinal studies done to talk about how it is that these media are taken up, disposed of, leaped over, or transformed through time. Our questions are, how do our media desires and needs and mediated relations change over our life course? And how will it specifically change, not only as we age, but because we're in a baby boomer blip in my country, where people have been born into the use of digital devices. How will they continue to use these devices upon retirement? So why do I use the term ageism? It's a term coined by Robert M. Butler to describe the widespread bigotry faced by older persons. And it's about describing forms of exclusion based on age, or in general, the fear of aging. So when we talk about ageism and aging, we're not just talking about an attitude towards older adults. What we're interested in is the way that the ways that age divisions in our society can also create intergenerational, not just conflict, but gaps. And I think that if we're going to talk about heritage, or we're going to talk about connection and communication, we have to think about these things through the life course. Otherwise, we reproduce a fear of aging within younger generations. So ageism can also be ensconced within the frameworks or protocols developed within our disciplines, including communication studies. For example, within diffusionism theory, when user adoption is traditionally discussed, practices of seniors or older adults are often depicted as negligible or lagging, as if it's a bad thing, and as if being up to speed is the most desirable outcome. And although it's not meant to be evaluative, when it's introduced into HCI studies, it often is. Older adults are often made to feel as if they must catch up with something that they're always missing. However, what we're also looking at is if diffusion is also equated with individual ownerships of devices. What happens in the case of older adults is that the practical workarounds that they have, such as cell phone sharing, may be not accounted for statistically, but also practices such as using missed calls to be able to get into contact with others, and ways that they deal with what it means to live on a fixed income after retirement. These things may not appear in the data that's being collected. So we use what is called the Access Rainbow model, developed by Clement and Chaire, to think about the multiple ways that barriers come into place, but also to be able to think about the complexity of what it is we talk about when we talk about access to digital technologies or to social media. This is just an example of a typical statistical chart where you can see how it's parsed out between 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 54. Then when you're 55 and over, you enter into what we call the gray zone, whereas if somebody who's 55 is no different than someone who's 90. So I think these are things that when we talk to policymakers, they say, well, we can't ruin our data sets. But what you do if you are uninterested in ruining your data sets or transforming your data sets is that you may be, in fact, not representing the world and the experiences of certain populations in a manner that really is representative of what is happening. So I'll just skip through here. So in conclusion, for these multiple reasons, the goal of our network is to generate appropriate methods for understanding the experiences of older adults while paying attention to the politics of location through a robust collection of case studies, which we've begun with individuals and organizations across the three areas I've identified in order to interrogate these topics across a range of media experiences as they play out in diverse cultural contexts. We understand aging then not just as a number, but as a lived experience that we are all going through at all times. And we also take the category of experience as incredibly important because there's research out there that's starting to indicate that in terms of learning, that the experience of use is a really important element. The focus in our work is not then just on isolated individuals, but on questions of community as well as relations that are kinship and also friendship related in relationship to aging. And I've basically gone through the 10 cultural assumptions quickly in this presentation to talk about digital ageism, but we take it as a term from Roland Barthes, and we identify it in order to be able to understand how assumptions can shape social practices, but also our disciplinary formations of knowledge. So the goal of our research is to interrogate the idea that age, new media, and old age are incommensurable by engaging locally with older populations in order to ask questions differently. In this way, we both hope to study and playfully intervene within the complexities of the contemporary digital media world, including the world of social media. And a final set of questions.